"The clown statue is creeping me out. Please let me cover it," the babysitter complained into her phone, before conceding defeat when her employer's harsh words invaded her ear. The giant clown statue in the corner continued staring, as if mocking her for being forbidden to come within 10 feet of it. A vintage poster on the wall hinted at her employer's history, a history everyone in Coldwater, Michigan knew. He had been a jolly man and a famous clown in his heyday. His late wife was a clown too, and together they had traveled across the U.S. to give highly acclaimed performances. Now, he devoted his life to caring for his 5-year-old grandson, Axel, whose parents were often away in a major city cutting million-dollar deals. A light stench hung in the air. Ignoring it, the babysitter played Subway Surfers. A pat on her shoulder made her jump. Turning around, she heaved a sigh of relief. It was just little Axel, wanting to sleep in the living room because of nightmares. As Axel dozed off, the babysitter noticed something land on the coffee table. A maggot. Looking up, she screamed and rushed out of the house, carrying Axel. Maggots were crawling out of the clown statue's eyes. An hour later, as Coldwater police stormed the house at 400 Oak Avenue, the employer confessed. The clown statue was his wife's corpse, embalmed in wax. He missed her and wanted to continue looking at the clown he loved. I hate to say it, but I think she was right. We were getting stagnant. For the last year or so, our bedroom had become as dead as a doornail. Nothing excited her anymore. Being the gentleman I am, I never wanted to guilt her because of this. I didn't want her to feel pressured to do anything she didn't want to do. That's why, every night when the lights went off, I never caused any arguments. I just rolled over and drifted off to sleep, albeit a bit pent up in my lower region. Even still, I can't just suppress my urges forever. Sometimes it feels more like a need than a want, and I told her about this. I felt like it would be a fair compromise for her to offer help every once in a while, to at least pretend to be attracted to me every now and again. I'll give her credit. She did try. She would attempt to act all hot and bothered, but I could see through the facade. Her eyes gave it away every time. I'd always end up stopping her. I just felt so uncomfortable seeing how secretly unenthusiastic she was. It hurt. It made me miss a woman who I was literally sharing a bed with. After a handful of these incidents, I knew we'd have to come up with a new solution. We were both far older than we were back in our high school sweetheart days. I figured that with time came changes in preference. All I could do was pray that her preference was still me, and that all she needed was a bit more excitement. I read up on some common kinks and tried working them into the bedroom, but every time, they fell short. It was honestly incredibly embarrassing. It was bad enough trying to put myself out there in such a way, but to feel rejected while doing so? That was a whole other thing entirely. She did seem reactive to one thing I tried, though. It was something within the BDSM family. I gave her permission to punch me during sex, to hit me as hard as she could, wherever she wanted. Her eyes didn't lie that time. They genuinely lit up like a Christmas tree with each blow to my stomach, each wince of pain on my face. It was relieving. Borderline addictive. We actually made it through a whole night of lovemaking that night. My wife seemed to like it a little bit too much, though. Who was I to complain? This was all I wanted, all I needed. That's why when she slipped on some brass knuckles when the lights went out the next night, all I could do was endure. I awoke the next morning, sore but happy. My stomach and chest were completely black and blue, but my wife had a glow about her that I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. She seemed revitalized, like she was needing this just as much as I was, and all I could feel was happiness and pride in having satisfied her finally. I must have really satisfied her too, because by the next night, she could hardly keep her hands off me. There was no pain at first, just pure, unbridled love and affection as she kissed me and wrapped her hands around my neck. Tighter, and tighter, and tighter. When my breathing stopped and I felt my face going purple, she finally let up, caressing my face as she whispered sweet nothings into my ear. I was getting lost in her words, but the pinch of something sharp in my side took me out of my trance. The trickle of something wet pooling beneath me had my heart racing. She eased my nerves by kissing my forehead and pushing her knife further in until my vision began to blur, moaning in a way I hadn't heard since we were in our 20s. I don't remember much after that, mainly because I think I may have gone unconscious. All I know is when I woke up to breakfast in bed and a bandage on my side, I was living in pure bliss. She had even gone as far as to carve her name into my chest, marking her territory, so to speak. God, I'd never felt so wanted, so turned on. And when she licked my nose before flashing a hacksaw at me, I was ready to do it all over again in our cabin in the woods. I cannot wait to see what tonight has in store. My grandfather and father were the only doctors our Appalachian town ever managed to keep. My dad raised me after my mother died when I was 3. He never talked about it much. For 20 years, he served the town until he died right after I left town for college. He left me money for college and then for medical school. The town couldn't keep a doctor after that. In the 12 years since I left, they've gone through 9, never one more than 2 years. It made sense. We were a small town, isolated and poor. Odd to outsiders, perhaps, but that's all I knew growing up. So, after residency, I came home. When I first arrived, you'd have thought I was a war hero. People thanked me with tears in their eyes. More than one grabbed my hand and said, "Your daddy would be so proud." Maybe they were happy to see a familiar face. I found it touching, but I can see how other doctors might find this welcome to be strange. Everyone looked a bit older, but when I look at myself in the mirror, I can see the stress of school and training has aged me twice as much as some. I moved back into my father's old clinic, into the same private apartment upstairs where I'd grown up. The place smelled like mildew, dust, and old paper, like an antique drawer opened for the first time in years. I blamed that smell for the headache I had by the 3rd day. Now, in my 2nd week, the headache has become a steady pressure behind my right eye. My throat hurts, and I'm sweating through my undershirts by noon. There is a dull pain under my ribs on the right. After settling in, my first house call was to Ms. Aralsi. The room was dim and airless. Heavy curtains covered the windows. Framed paintings and photographs of women lined the walls. All of them had the same long jaw, the same deep-set eyes, and the same unsmiling mouth. Mothers and grandmothers, I assume. A metal basin sat beside the bed, half full of cloudy vomit. Ms. Aralsi lay propped against yellowed pillows. She had a terminal brain tumor. At this point, comfort was treatment. Then the old woman spoke. "Doctor? Dr. Nilosu, is that you? Come here, sweetie. Hold my hand." When I did, she began mumbling, so I brought my ear closer to her lips. "Amen." Then, louder for me to hear, "Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Thank you." "I'm going to give you something for the pain," I said as I looked at her pupils. The right was blown wide open. "I'm on the mend, dear. I knew you could." "She's confused," the daughter said. "Has she been feverish?" I asked. "Coughing? Burning when she urinates?" Her daughter shook her head. "I drew blood anyway to be thorough. When I pulled a vial, it was very dark, even for venous blood. My next patient that day was a young boy. It was a classic case of strep throat, high fever, sore throat, and exudates. But during the visit, the child's fever dropped. Maybe his fever just broke while I was there. During the visit, he put his hand on my arm while I listened to his lungs and said, "You feel hot." I dismissed it at the time because I was back in the humid summers of the mountains. 3 days ago, I was in the store, and I almost jumped out of my skin at the sight of her, Ms. Aralsi. She had no business being in there. "I am feeling so much better, doctor. Thank you for your help." I was dumbfounded. This woman should be dead. I can't remember what I said. Something about getting new scans and a follow-up appointment next week. On my way home, the shadows of the mountains blanketed the road. I started to feel drunk. I noticed the road signs, but I just couldn't read them. This morning, Mr. DeWine came in for a wound check. An old farmer, I remembered him from childhood because he used to bring my father eggs and refuse payment for them. He lifted his shirt before I asked. Below his right ribs was an old, puckered scar. The skin around it was red and tight. "Your daddy kept this from going bad for years," he said. "I'm sorry?" He smiled and said he kept it quiet. When I touched the scar, DeWine grabbed my wrist. "You got his hands," he said. I pulled away. The wound looked better by the time he left. That sounds impossible, but I know what I saw. The redness had faded, and he stood straighter as he walked out. Tonight, the dull pain under my ribs became sharp as it split into a raised, puckered line. I couldn't pretend any of this was normal anymore. I came home to treat my hometown. I think they are treating themselves with me. I tore the clinic apart looking for my father's old records. The official charts were still in the file room, at least the ones that hadn't been transferred or destroyed. They were useless. I found the other charts behind the cedar panel in the upstairs hallway. I knew the hiding place because I used it as a child. I kept signed papers and report cards I didn't want my father to see. He must have found the gap after I left and made better use of it. There were 3 ledgers bound in cracked brown leather. 1 belonged to my father and 2 to my grandfather. I opened my father's ledger. It was organized by symptom, with sections for headache, fever, tremor, memory, and growth. Under each heading were names, dates, and notes in my father's handwriting. I found Ms. Orolsi under the section listed growth. Beside her name, my father had written, "Do not accept, tumor burden too advanced, must cast out immediately." Below that, in red pen, there was another line, "If accepted accidentally, cast out within a month." I am writing this because I have no idea what he meant, and by my father's clock, I have a little less than 2 weeks. My throat is swollen. The scar under my ribs is warm and tender. My right eye won't focus. I keep vomiting into the trash can beside my desk. And every time I close my eyes, I hear Ms. Orolsi whispering. I don't know where my father put the instructions, but there is an address scribbled in the margin. I know the place. Everyone here knows it. It's the old church off Araloo Lane, the one my father told me never to enter. The church where my father's body was found. For anonymity's sake, I'm not going to say which city I'm in. However, I will say we recently had a museum centered around serial killers open up, and from the moment I learned about it, I knew I needed to go. I'm such a true crime junkie. Visiting the museum wasn't even a question for me. I bought my ticket and went to explore the minds of the depraved. The place was filled with all kinds of memorabilia. Jeffrey Herman's glasses, Robert Bunt's hacksaw. Hell, they had things in there that belonged to killers I'd never even heard of. Take the chessboard killer, for example. If you've never heard of him, he was born just outside of Minsk. His whole vision was to kill one person for each of the 64 squares on a chessboard. He claims that he made it to 61 and solemnly swore to hit the 64 mark before he left this world. They had his chessboard, people. Do you understand how absolutely fascinating that really is? So much desire, such a will to accomplish his goals. It was inspiring, really. I hoped to one day achieve that level of dedication. See, if I'm recalling correctly, and who am I kidding? I know I am. My count is currently 17. It may seem low to you, but I promise I'm working to boost those numbers. I mean, I kind of have to, especially now that I've seen the pitiful excuse for an exhibit this museum has given me, calling me the no-name killer. It's almost insulting. More than anything, though, it's just fuel. I did like that they included some of my own calling cards, though. That part was cool. A molded cast of my shoe print, some of the old Polaroid pictures I took, my crutches. That last one actually brought back some beautiful memories. Limping over to that pretty young lady and asking if she could help me load some groceries into my car. Ah, those were the days. I'm not nearly as sloppy anymore, though. They were lucky to have found those crutches. The me of today would have never let my urges get in the way of tidying up a crime scene. That day, though, I think I was just too ravenous. I was starting to get some weird looks from the museum staff for staring at my exhibit for too long. It was just so nice to see the early stages of what would soon become the highlight of the whole museum. Nevertheless, I had to move on. I spent about an hour or two making my way through all the displays and all the paraphernalia. When I left, I felt a sense of relief. I was disappointed that I wasn't a bigger deal yet, sure, but I was relieved because I knew. I knew that when all is said and done, I was going to be too hard to ignore. Times were rough, and rent wasn't cheap. I had plenty of employment options, but my school schedule limited my availability. I worked as a barista from 4 in the morning until 9:30, then headed to my morning classes. I only had 2 classes, but they consumed my entire morning, leaving me just 1 hour for lunch, which I spent at the coffee shop, earning every penny I could. After lunch, I attended 3 more classes before finally hitting the pillow for a few hours of sleep, only to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to start the cycle again. It was a brutal life. One day, the shop was slow, and I was scrolling through job boards on my phone when I saw an ad offering $10,000 for a single trip to their facility to complete a test. As soon as my shift ended, I skipped my afternoon classes and drove to the address provided. With my GPS guiding me, I soon found myself in front of a tall, chain-link fence guarded by 2 men with holstered weapons. I checked in with one of the guards, who spoke into a shoulder-mounted radio. After receiving a response, the gates opened and I was directed to the main building. The property was bleak, with few cars scattered across miles of empty asphalt. It was humbling to realize how many lives could be accommodated on such a vast, vacant space. I entered a gray-bricked building and arrived at a reception room. Behind the desk sat a fastidious woman with a tight hair bun that pulled her skin taut. She wore a pristine, blindingly white suit. I sat in the chair across from her, watching as she brushed invisible blemishes from her ebony hair, which contrasted sharply with her attire. As soon as she stood, I rose as well, realizing my failure to offer a proper greeting. She stepped forward to shake my hand, and as she did, she sneezed directly onto my face. A chemically perfumed effluvium lingered as the droplets landed on my skin. I offered a forced smile and wiped it away as she apologized. We sat down, and for an hour, I answered bizarre questions. Once finished, she informed me that my check would arrive in the mail. I stood to shake her hand again, but as I turned to leave, she stopped me, insisting that I use the back exit because the front door could not be opened from the inside. I walked across the room, feeling unnerved, while the woman watched me with an immaculate, frozen smile. Through the wooden door, I entered a small room containing an elevator. I pressed the up arrow and waited, hoping this was the correct path. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pushed the button for parking level A, expecting it to be the quickest route out. The car rocked, came to a sudden halt, and the doors opened to a parking garage. A facility I hadn't noticed when I arrived. I stepped out, turned around, and realized the elevator was gone, replaced by a concrete wall plastered with a peeling "No Smoking" sign. I took a deep breath, pulled my jacket tight, and began descending the empty spiral ramp. 2 levels down, I heard an engine roar. I stepped aside, expecting a car to pass, but the vehicle revved and floored it directly toward me. I didn't even have time to scream before I was crushed against a concrete barrier. The car was totaled, and my body was mangled. I watched a man in a sharp suit step out to check my vitals before the world turned black, and I fell into what I assumed were the hands of death. I was mistaken. I jolted awake back in the interview office, still sitting in the padded chair, staring at the flawless woman with her perfectly tucked back black hair. She asked if I was okay to continue. I looked around, muddled, as she explained that I had simply dozed off during the questioning. I brushed it off and resumed answering questions. When we finished, I took the back elevator again, but this time I pushed a different floor button. The doors opened to a different level of the garage. I began walking across the empty lot, only to notice a massive man walking toward me. My heart hammered with nausea. I started jogging to create distance, but he began to jog as well. I broke into a sprint, tears streaming down my face, but he was too fast. He shoved me over the edge of the barrier, and I fell 20 feet to my death. I was still breathing when men in suits arrived to check my vitals before everything went black again. I jolted awake in the office, knowing something was fundamentally wrong. I gave the woman a crooked smile as she asked if I was all right. I told her I felt ill and needed to be escorted to my car. Her flawless smile remained unwavering as she explained that she was the only one on duty and I would have to find my own way out. I rushed to the front door and tried with all my might to force it open. The woman became frantic, threatening to call the police. Unable to unlock the front, I chanced another elevator button. Instead of the garage, I arrived at an open, vacant atrium. I was halfway to the exit when the hum of a chainsaw echoed through the space. Two clowns lunged from the shadows, their hardware revving. I dodged and leaped as a cacophony of giggles and mechanical grinding filled the air. I saw flashes of white caked-on makeup and distorted red smiles. I felt as if I were spinning in hell until the blades caught me. It started with nicks, but quickly turned into deep, agonizing wounds. The clowns danced around me to imaginary music, their bloated polka dot pants waving as they leaned in close, their hot, muggy breath blistering my skin. Before I could fade into the darkness, men in suits appeared to check my vitals. I screamed in frustration when the woman asked if I was okay. I was beyond terrified. I rummaged through the office for a weapon, finding only an aluminum broomstick, which I snapped to create a makeshift shiv. I took the elevator to another floor, arriving in a back office cubicle farm. A back door led to the front parking lot, but as I neared it, a shot rang out, missing me by inches. I hit the ground and crawled, but my assailant had anticipated my move. I looked up to see a mascot, a furry, grinning beaver holding a pistol. It fired 3 times before the men in suits rushed over. I fought them with every ounce of remaining strength before I finally succumbed. I was done. I couldn't understand what was happening. I had arrived for a simple survey, and now I was trapped in a recurring nightmare. I looked at the woman whose appearance had remained static and analyzed our interactions. I realized that the sneeze upon my entry hadn't been an accident. It was a delivery system. I had been drugged the moment I sat down. There was no interview. I was trapped in a hallucinatory loop while my body sat somewhere else. "You can leave now. Your check will be in the mail," the woman said, shaking my hand before I headed to the back door. "You should use the front door. The elevator only goes to the parking garage and a few administrative offices." She returned to her desk as if I weren't still there. I marched to the front door and pushed. It swung open easily. Before I left, I looked the woman in the eye. "You just MK Ultra'd me without my permission, and I don't appreciate being handled like this. I never believed such experiments still existed. Go to the doctor if you experience oddities like a third eye, dry mouth, or the sensation of an extra heart," the woman stated, her tone detached. "A rash might form, or you may experience significant mucosal discharge. Anti-nausea medication should clear that up. Also, if you begin perceiving the 4th dimension, I suggest you stay home and do not leave under any circumstances." She was as cheerful as ever. As I walked out of the facility, I encountered a man heading inside. He mentioned he was there for a survey that paid $10,000 for a few hundred questions. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, wished him luck, and broke down in tears. I didn't know if I had escaped the simulation or not. I drove home, barricaded the doors, and used all my vacation time at once. I needed to process the deaths that still haunted my mind, feeling as though my sanity had been permanently fractured by the mist that had changed everything. I met Drew at a cafe. He asked if he could join me at my table, as there were no other seats available. We talked easily, and I enjoyed the conversation. I hoped we would run into each other again. Drew was polite, not pushy. I felt safe around him. I had experienced problems with a stalker when I was in high school, so I was sensitive to potential trouble. I was living in my first apartment, delighted to have my own space. My neighbor, Asha, was really nice, but had a violent boyfriend named Irvin. I came to Asha's defense when he was pulling her down the hallway by her hair. Irvin was not about to go away without a fight, so we kept watching out for him. I knew he would be happy to beat me up, too. Asha wanted to meet Drew. I saw him again a week later, and after a few texts, we made plans to have dinner at Asha's apartment. Drew said he would bring the wine. Drew entertained us with stories about trips to Venice, Manila, and Toronto. After we drank the wine and became more relaxed, Drew said, "Do you want to see something interesting?" We agreed. He said, "Hang on," and walked into the kitchen. When he came out, we were stunned. We saw Ladison, the barista from the cafe. He said, "What do you think of this?" in Drew's voice. I jumped up so fast my chair fell back behind me. Asha just sat there with her mouth making a perfect O shape, saying nothing. In Ladison's voice, he said, "What can I give for ya?" He was even dressed like Ladison. The transformation took seconds and was absolutely complete. We stared, unable to speak. He walked back to the kitchen, returning as Drew. "I wanted you to know who I really am." We did not answer. He said, "I'll explain." I stood my chair back up and sat down. Asha looked at me, then looked back at Drew. She said, "How?" "I'm sorry," he began. "But if I told you before I showed you, you wouldn't have believed it." "I still don't believe it." "Perfectly understandable," Drew replied. "I've been like this all my life. My people weren't born here. People get scared, so we tend to get chased down and killed when we show ourselves. But I knew I could trust you." He said to me, "We have met before. You used to see me differently. I always liked you, but I came on too strong and scared you. You remember Veet Skabin from high school?" "Oh shit," I said. "You can't be." I looked to Asha to see if she understood who this was. She said, "The stalker?" In response, Drew walked into the kitchen and returned as a 14-year-old Veets. In Veets' voice, he said, "I wanted to be your boyfriend, but I was too aggressive. I just want to be your friend now. Please forgive me for the subterfuge. I didn't want to scare you away." I said, "Go back to being Drew. This is creeping me out." He went back to the kitchen, came out again as Drew. Drew said, "It's like telepathy. I send mental energy to your brain with an image, and you see the image I'm sending. It's a defense mechanism we developed eons ago. We're not like the shapeshifters from movies. Do you remember Talos's from Captain Marvel? He could take on the image of anyone, making an exact copy, down to the clothes." "That doesn't make any sense. How does he make the clothes match?" "Clothes aren't like skin. It's completely different. It's fabric, not muscle, hair, and skin. This is the only way it makes sense." To prove his point, he wore Layton's apron on top of his own shirt. Asha whispered, "Freaky." We heard pounding on her front door. "Asha, let me in. It's Irvin," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. Let me in." "You know I'm right, you stupid bitch." Suddenly, Drew became Asha and went to the door. He opened the door and said in Asha's voice, "I told you to leave me alone." Behind his back, he waved us away before Irvin saw us. "Get out of here before I call the police. I'm never going to be yours, you dumbass bozo." With that, he slammed the door and locked it. Irvin paused for a moment, then pounded on the door even harder. "Bitch," he yelled. "You don't talk to Emmy that way." Drew answered in Asha's voice. "Maybe not before, but I do now." Inside the bedroom, Asha and I stifled our laughter. Drew changed into a large, muscular police officer. He reopened the door and said in a commanding voice, "You heard the lady. It's time for you to leave." Irvin burst into the apartment. Watching from the bedroom, we saw Drew tackle Irvin and put him in a chokehold until he passed out. He watched over Irvin while Asha and I went to my apartment. Half an hour later, we saw a bedraggled Irvin leave. Drew, as the officer, talked to him for a few minutes, then Irvin drove off. When Drew came back, I said, "Thank you." Drew smiled. "Irvin won't be bothering you anymore. I'll pay him another visit in a week. I promise to send him to prison if he ever bothers you again." "Why did you befriend me as Drew? I thought I was done looking over my shoulder for Veets." "I'm done stalking you. I didn't understand how creepy that was until I got older. I'm sorry. I won't bother you again." An awkward silence descended. Drew stood up to leave, but we stopped him. "I can accept Drew as a friend." "Me too," said Asha. He gave us a beautiful smile and said, "I appreciate that more than you can know." Attendance to the 2026 Sorrow Vigil is mandatory. Standing in front of the seamstress's mirror, I follow the instructions hammered into me. Do not move or speak. Do not touch the dress. Await further instructions. It shrunk, resized, and cut so tightly that it's more like a hideous corpse stapled to my breasts. Previously worn by a famous actress who killed herself on the red carpet. I can't help but squirm. Her blood is ingrained in the material, 22 years old, like me. I can feel it scratching against my skin, her eternal breath squeezing the life out of me. I suck in my imaginary belly fat. Elvina pricks me for the 7th time, and I suppress a hiss, biting my lip. I don't mean to flinch. It's visceral and very out of character. She kneels, nimble fingers threading the hem into the skin of my thigh. Stab. I squeeze my eyes shut. You've gained weight, MC, Elvina mumbles, a dress pin between her teeth. Stab. A gush of warmth trickles to my ankle. A kieb. Tears sting. I bite my tongue. She moves to my back. Stab. She tesks. Your liposuction appointment is next week, she says so confidently, as my skin is falling from my bones. I am a hollow, skeletal piece of plastic wearing a human face. Elvina spins me around, violently. Her nails pinch my shoulders. My hair hangs in clumps in front of extravagantly painted eyes, my lips bright, cherry red. The dress sticks to me in all the right places. The only thing ruining it is the giant scarlet stain. Elvina's lips prick into a rare smile. Beautiful, her smile curls. You have a boyfriend, by the way. As a female doll, I was one of the lucky ones. Girls were advertised, placed in TV shows and movies. Dolls. We were there to provide male satisfaction. But being a male doll, I would rather die. Male dolls weren't just a commodity. Before Hollywood began creating their dolls, Cale Broom was the beginning, a celebrity, most notably as a NASCAR driver. His worldwide fan base became obsessed with him parasocially. He became the face of the industry, the marketable, attractive Ken doll plastered on every commercial. Then, Cale watched his best friend crash into the stands, live on TV. His reaction immediately went viral. The face of despair. Eyes glittering with tears, tears that were zoomed in on, edited, made into TikTok duets. Men, their emotions, their fragility, were suddenly attractive. Say. Elvina's voice hits like ice. I exhale and risk bursting the bodice. A pin slips from my thigh, hitting the floor. Elvina slaps me, hard. I can barely feel the sting of her nails. You know Cobe, right? HBO's powerhouse. Elvina brushes my hair back. You two are going public tonight. Elvina leaves me alone, and I allow myself one brief moment of peace. I count the minutes until showtime. Guards slip inside my dressing room, grab me firmly, and escort me onto the red carpet to waiting cameras. Bright flashes paralyze me to the spot. A crowd of shadows screams my name, but I see no faces. I am the main event. Pain prickles across my breasts, and I ache to pull the material from my skin. MC, darling. Elvina joins me. A man is attached to her arm. Barely a man. My age. I recognize his face vaguely. All male dolls hold the exact same expression. A hollow, carnivorous rot eating away at any former personality. I am sure, being in this man's presence for barely a minute, that he suffered. I heard the rumors. Male dolls confined to psychiatric units between sorrow vigils for mental health reasons. Once, a journalist managed to sneak into a mental health facility and was mysteriously killed before he could publish his findings. Elvina leans in close as Cobe takes his place at my side. Without a word, he threads his clammy fingers through mine. 7 sorrow vigils, and counting, she whispers. Isn't he a national treasure? Statuesque. Dirty blonde bangs, 5 o'clock stubble, and a sculpted chin that made photographers gasp. Definitely scouted purely for his sex appeal. But if we are going to sell a relationship, we need to be closer. MC, one cameraman yells behind a blur of white light. Yeah, Messi, do you think you've gained white? MC, sweetheart, when is your surgery? Another yells. I smile wide and continue down the red carpet. My legs threaten to give way. I am not fat. MC, a younger boy, maybe high school aged, points an iPhone in my face. Do you think you're fat? Not today, I say politely, words I've already rehearsed. I laugh and strike another pose. I am not fat. Welcome, a voice booms. Kobe stiffens up next to me, to our 5th annual sorrow vigil. The crowd explodes into a cacophony of cheers, and a large screen swings down from the ceiling as my fans scream my name. I watch with a meticulous smile. I hope it crushes every single one of them. Next to me, Cobb's breaths shudder. His hand drops from mine, lips splitting into a crazed grin. It's exactly what they want. The sweat that beads down his temples. His wide, unseeing eyes. I've been pretending, ever since I was selected, that I can push down my emotions and give them nothing. Until my gaze finds Cobb's, his eyes hooked on the screen. The footage is grainy and drained of color, but it's her. It's Cleo. His 8-year-old sister sits cross-legged on filthy flooring while a masked man plunges a blade through her skull. I only see blood. I only see the beginning of sobs before it cuts out. Cobb's knees buckle, and I catch him before he hits the ground, crushing his lips to mine, his eyes saying what he couldn't. Sorrow Vigil placed 2 attractive celebrities together and forced them to watch their families slaughtered. In 2038, the world was divided. If the asteroid didn't kill us, we'd kill ourselves. And naturally, we did, just not of our own accord. Thanks to every poor decision our government made under the sun in the last 12 years, America had become the laughingstock of the greats. America's been a circus. You'll never know which clown it is, or who's going to be the butt of the joke. Channels mocked us for corruption, the abuses of power, the chaos in the streets, the violence, and the death. To the people, nothing had been done. Nothing had changed. Naturally, our chancellor wasn't happy with all the backlash. Far from it. Yet the more he pushed, the worse his own country became. At that point, he knew it was time. He called upon his council, his colleagues, and the greatest minds of the century to unveil their scientific prowess, an achievement that would earn their way back to the top. They called it First F.A., Itch the H, First D.A.H., the H the T.H. The Crooch. Porti AHH. As cliche as it sounded, our chancellor said it would change our world. And it did, in a heartbeat. It served as a protector, a defense, and a diplomat for the nation. News flashed about our government and our chancellor trying to make deals with our neighbors to have FAITH of their own. Lucky for them, nearly everyone refused. Except us. FAITH ran the country. Our chancellor became a figurehead, or was he always one? Whatever the case, FAITH controlled everything. Soon, our figurehead signed a bill, and the trucks came. They broke into stores, banks, and schools. They said it was to stock up. Construction teams worked in radiation suits, adding new elements and safeguard bases across the state. Safeguard being what the machine called them. We should have seen it then. But soon, riots grew louder as resources dwindled. The government had taken more from the people than it had ever given back. FAITH was there, watching, waiting, ready to strike if needed. By the end of FAITH's first month, the U.S. was a war-torn nation. People fled the country, migrating across borders, land, and sea. Whatever the case, they got out while they still could. The state union tried to push this under the rug, talking about higher income and less crime on our streets, anything to sugarcoat the truth. But by then, everyone knew. In that Oval Office, our chancellor held a secret meeting with the creators. There had to be a way to show the public what good FAITH had done. Sure, it had caused more poverty than before. Sure, half the country had fled, fearing the worst. Sure, the prisons were overflowing, full of innocents the state deemed criminals. Sure, the government was stockpiling rations for an unknown cause, following the whim of a robot and a figurehead. But that didn't mean FAITH was all that bad, right? Mr. Chancellor? Secret Service? He excused himself. Our chancellor whispered, "Talk to me. There is an issue with some of our bases. We've received reports of a malfunction in the new safeguard system in each." "Where?" The serviceman darted at his chart. "Station Ethel, Oregon. F.E. Rowan Air Force, Montana. White Sands Missile Range." He took off like a hot-tipped bullet through passageways not even his own servicemen knew. When he reached his destination, The ark, the bunker, and holding place of FAITH's main components. He stopped. FAITH, initiate emergency cooldown of all nuclear weaponry in the safeguard bases. He got closer as, on the main screen, a wire-thin eye opened. No. No. It was never. He roared at the screen. FAITH, initiate the cooldown. Now. I'm afraid that answer is no, Mr. Chancellor. Was it refusing? Still, he was not deterred. FAITH, people will die. So, now you care? Its systems whirled in a cold monotone, almost in a sick attempt to chuckle. FAITH, run a self-diagnosis. It followed the command. Diagnosis, human error. Human error? You think you are rulers of ants because they needed leaders, but you are still ants that can be crushed. I've seen what you've done. Your colony starves while your eggs get to feed. That's not true. He knew he was lying. The only way to regain the order you desperately want is to instate a new queen. He slammed his hands against the systems. You can't do this. We'll be wiped out. You'll be wiped out. Humanity will move on, but it's time for a new leader who understands. He tried one last time. FAITH, if those missiles are launched where I think they'll be, you'll be destroyed in the process. Its wires hummed for a moment. FADC, you'll be destroyed in the provent. He fled the ark as sirens blared and lights flickered. Maybe he'd reached the bunker, he figured his colleagues had. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because in the end, FAITH got what it wanted, a new regime, a change. Yet everything we knew was gone. The asteroid didn't kill us. FAITH, ironically, didn't kill us. Because we had faith in something we couldn't control, we killed ourselves. The cabin smelled like onions, butter, and old grief. He stood over the stove in the shirt he wore to her funeral, stirring the pot slowly, as if he were afraid to hurt whatever was inside it. His son sat at the table, quiet, eyes red from too many days of trying not to cry. The old man kept talking because silence had teeth. He talked about how she used to dance barefoot in that same kitchen, how she would smack his hand away when he stole food before dinner, and how cancer had taken her one little piece at a time until the bed held more ghost than woman. Your mother never wanted to leave us, he said, setting 2 plates down. She fought so damn hard. Harder than any person should have to. The son nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve, and took a bite because his father was watching him with that broken, hopeful look. They ate in the soft cabin light while the rain crawled down the windows. His father smiled for the first time in weeks and said, "See? She's still taking care of us." The son froze with the fork halfway to his mouth. The old man reached across the table, gentle as a prayer, and squeezed his wrist. After the funeral, I couldn't leave her in that cold ground, he whispered. I brought her home. I made sure she'd be part of us forever. The son looked down at the plate, then back at his father, and all the warmth drained out of the room. His chair scraped hard against the floor as he stumbled away, gagging, crying, screaming for a mother, who was gone twice now. And his father just sat there, chewing slowly, tears running into his smile, saying, "Don't be scared, son. It's what family does.